In today's video, I'm going to restore this dresser that I got for free on a local ad. So they mentioned in the ad that there was some body filler, like auto body filler, used to patch up some damage in the past, and there's a little bit of water damage, which I didn't see anything at first. There's just the little bit of superficial stuff, like the dovetail separating and cracked drawer bottom that can be fixed with some glue up. Drawer 2 was okay. It's this bottom drawer that you can see when this paint's flaking off. Underneath there's a whole lot of body filler. And then some water damage, which you can see. And here you can see the grooves that are left by, I guess they're called runners, I don't know what they're called, but the sides of the drawers, and then these metal pieces, when those runners get worn down, the drawer bottom starts to drag on those. That's what the marks are. So I started with the intention of scraping off all the paint, but this stuff was really tough to get off. I mean, after a good bit of time, I had only made that much damage, and you could still see plenty of paint. So I switched over to some rough sandpaper. But the downside when you sand off paint is it gums up your paper pretty quickly. So when I finished, I was able to notice the first couple of spots of Bondo body filler, whichever you want to call it. And then there was a spot or two that had some wood missing on the top and more water damage. So I figured I'd practice doing some patchwork, which did not go well. I didn't have any wood that would match, but I was just trying to see if I could splice things in and make it look somewhat decent. It didn't go as planned. But I had some video editing problems, so I'm having to leave this in, the full footage here on this piece. So after I got the damaged areas cleaned up, it's just some simple patchwork with scrap pieces of wood. It was going okay, but what you'll see is after I glued these two, you'll see me putting some brads or nails up from the bottom because I ended up routing all the way through the top in this one section and was not happy. So then the nails actually were too long too, so I had to clip those off. And after some sanding and little TLC, I was able to get it where it's all flush. So clearly the pieces aren't going to match up, and I knew I was going to cover the top up by the time I'd started routing anyway. So I was lucky to find a piece of oak plywood, which was on clearance at the local woodworking store, and got that glued up and was able to buy a flush bit for the flush trim bit for the router. And first time I tried this, it was really a good feeling when you are able to get something like this that trims up exactly like you had planned. You can see those bits work really well to follow the contour and match up. So after that dried, I moved on to the little bit of structural repairs. So this top brace was split open, and then the sides had definitely come loose. So I used glue and a couple of screws to make this top support hold up much better. And then on the sides, I injected some glue down on the crevices to get in there, and it's hard to get clamps in there. So I just cut a piece of scrap wood and kind of applied pressure between the two sides. That's how I would keep it together after all this glue comes. So that's the scrap wood I'm talking about to hold the pressure. So it worked on all 3 levels, and it's going to keep it in place for me. Then after that was setting up, took some Danish oil and put oil all on the inside to kind of give the dried out wood a little more life. And then the leg just had a simple little split here. It was nothing bad. So I took some sawdust from when I was sanding and some wood glue, filled those cracks up, and they'll be hidden once this is painted up. So to get the drawers apart, you gotta kind of work your way slowly along and then pull out the nails to get these drawer bottoms. Sometimes they can get wedged in there pretty well, so it's kind of tricky to get them out of there. So this is that bottom drawer where I feel like the back of it had kind of warped from a little bit of water over the years, but you could tell somebody had done some repairs at one point in time. So I was able to knock that out, and then here, once I got it all taken apart, you'll be able to see what happens. So whatever repairs they had tried to do in the past were definitely superficial, and they never actually fixed the damage. So just with my hands and very little effort, I broke off the bottom piece. So it's a pretty straightforward repair. Just took it over to the table saw, cut a straight edge, and then you can kind of see a little bit more of the damage. And then there's thick layer of Bondo. So the whole intent here is get rid of all the non-wood patchwork pieces that they had done. But that stuff, it's definitely hard, so I don't fault them for using Bondo to make a strong patch, but it's a nightmare to get that stuff off of there. And then once you sand it, you really don't want to breathe it in. So I just took a piece of scrap plywood that I had and patched it up. And you can see a little bit of that veneer is kind of separated. But this is what makes you really nervous. Once you get the patch on there and you're just trying to trim it up. Right here, I just going slowly because I'm pretty nervous and hoping that I don't have a slip where that whole drawer kicks into my table saw blade, and then I just ruin that entire drawer and have to start from scratch. So thankfully it came out okay. I was able to just, the seam where I'd cut it, just put in some wood filler, sanded it down, and then went over to the table saw and miter saw to get a piece of wood to put in that patch. So first step, glue it up, and then drill some pilot holes, throw some dowels in there for a little extra support. Just repeated this process 5 times. And it's probably not too necessary, but it's going to make sure it gives it extra strength. So you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 of those patches. And then the last step is drilling in and taking the chisel to kind of match the dovetail from all the other pieces. And since this is going to be a painted piece, it works out nicely where I don't have to do a whole lot of matching and making sure I get the right kind of wood grain and wood species and all that kind of stuff. In the first step, I put on this milk paint, which this stuff goes on thick and it takes a lot of, it dries nicely, but at the same time it takes a lot more coverage than normal latex paint does. I really like the way it looks in the finished result though. So you can see here, the paint, the moisture in the paint kind of bubbled up a couple of wood, like veneer spots, so they were thin. I just pried those out. And it wasn't really veneer, it was more some other material. So I got that patch with some wood filler, repainted, and then put on a polyacrylic. The downside of these cheap brushes is the bristles pop off pretty easily. And then this is another part that I've only done one other time, so it's always nerve-wracking when you're doing it. But here I'm putting a glaze on top, and then you just wipe it off so it leaves kind of an aged look on it. And you can wipe off as much or as little as you want. And most of the other people, when I watch them, they tend to leave a lot more of the dark glaze inside the crevices and at the joints, but I ended up wiping off more than I think most people do. And then once we had the paint ready, took some edge banding, which it's got glue already on it, but in order to activate the glue, you have to put some heat on it. So we ironed it, and then the curves were a little tricky for the iron to reach, so I improvised and used a heat gun and then taped it up. And here I'm using a block to kind of not score, but just put some pressure on the edge banding, so when I come back and cut it off with a knife, it comes off more easily. But you can see how thin this stuff is, so you want to be careful, and that's why if somebody says they have a veneer or edge banding, you don't want to do too much sanding because you'll just burn right through it. So then a light hand sanding just to go through and make sure that there's no rough spots or that edge banding wasn't sticking up too much. Then wiped it all down with mineral spirits to give it a good clean base before I stained it. And I went with this dark stain that kind of provides a good contrast versus that milk paint and glaze that's on the rest of the dresser. Then once that was finished, went back and put some more polyurethane on top of the stain. I used polyacrylic on the painted surfaces and the polyurethane on the stained. I'm not sure if it really matters, it's just a kind of a habit that I've done and kind of stuck with it. So you can see a bristle sticking in the light there. I ended up sanding in between coats and did 2 coats of polyurethane, so the bristles are going to be gone later. Then while it dried, just killed some time watching this guy play around. And here's the final result. I really like the way it turned out, so I hope that you guys like it. And it's, in my opinion, it's much better than it was before I started. So here are the before and after shots too. Thanks for watching.